talking today about the retrograde planets that we have in the sky here on April 10th or so. 4 retrograde planets that are visible. That would be Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus. So it's a lot of retrograde energy. Now there's a lot of power that can come when we have the retrograde cycles and the energy. So every retrograde planet presents some time for reflection, and Saturn and Jupiter are retrograde a lot, for months at a time. But when we get this many, it is a thing to really ponder. So I just did a recent video where I talk about it quite a bit, but I'm going to talk about something different today, and it has to do with being thorough and going back and redoing things. So with retrograde you have that RE prefix, retrograde. So it's literally a time to go back and redo things that you didn't do so well before. Regroup, reevaluate, reassess, but it's, and again, around things that these planets are dealing with, like your communication. Rethink some things you've said, for example. As they relate to another person, reevaluate the respect level that you have with them and how much you've respected them, how much they've respected you. Respect even has the re in it, right? And reassess what you're committed to. Reevaluate it, like with Saturn. What are your focus, what are you focused on, and how have you gotten away from it? Okay? Literally, because sometimes people, they focus on something and then they lose focus. So for example, maybe it's very important for you. I'll just give an example. Things like, let's say, studying astrology or mystical things or things that are more than just, living your life. Let's say that at times when you've really focused on it, let's say even at a time when Saturn was retrograde, and you reflect and say, what am I interested in making a commitment to? What do I want to commit to? And you commit to something like astrology study. Or something that's really deep in your heart, because retrograde energies are where we can really connect with what's in our heart. And you say, yes, I'm going to commit to that. And then Saturn goes direct, or Jupiter goes direct, and then you leave it for a while because you get sucked up into the busyness of the world. When the planets go retrograde, they make you reevaluate. Look, what's happening in my life? What am I committed to now? And should I be committed to just the same old, like making sure I don't, run out of money, or making sure I'm just, people like me, or whatever the things are that the busyness of the world gets us distracted in? Or are you really focused and committed to what really turns you on in the long term? Again, like with Saturn, it's things that are you really committed to your salvation and to living in truth and beauty and spiritual growth? Are you really committed to that? Are you focused on it? And I say this because, I have a lot of students in my certification courses. At any given time, I have more than 100 students, and they get off track. They get distracted. They get, life is hard sometimes, and we get busy. And I encourage them all the time when we have these, especially these retrograde times, it's time to go back and reflect, reevaluate, go back and be thorough about these things you thought you learned, and go back and really reassess what's important in your life. Like for instance, with my students who are in certification courses or who study with me or this or that, and maybe the astrology is not actually that important after all. Usually though, when they reflect on it, they're like, actually, yeah, you know what, I've just been getting spun out on the world and I am focused on this. And they'll go back and refocus on it and recommit to going back and learning it and saying, yeah, okay, the reason I'm so frustrated isn't because this part of the course is so hard or this thing is so hard. It's because I'm so distracted by the world that I don't have any bandwidth left to dedicate to what I really love. And that's the thing to consider. That's the thing I'm talking about. You want to pay really close attention to this This is very important. And what I mean is that notice what you do have time for. Notice how much time you seem to have for distracting yourself with, I don't know, maybe like TV or entertainment or things that are just not important. Maybe not, it's not a lot. I'm not saying there's a lot of it, but think of what you do have time for. And you can be as honest with yourself as you want to be, but notice those things that challenge you. And I mean things that show up that are going to be things of greatness or big dreams, like let's say learning astrology or learning some big thing or just taking your life to the next level. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be some big something. It just means, you know, growing more in compassion and love and those things that you want for yourself. And then you're like, oh, I failed again. Oh, I didn't have time. And you're like ready to just feel bad about yourself again or some other kind of thing. Again, before you start that tape loop in your head again, like the recent video I talked about with Mercury and that voice in our head saying, oh yeah, you just never seem to do that. Yeah, here it is again. It's just too hard. I don't think I'm ever going to get this. It's just too much. And notice before you start spinning out on that, what you do have time for. Especially once the excuses come. Oh, I just don't have time for it. I'm just too busy. I'm this or that. Okay, what aren't you too busy for? What do you seem to always have time for? Is it stuff that's really that important? And I'm just asking, maybe it is. But this is what the retrograde is about. And with so many planets retrograde, it's like, oh, you know, my partner is just such a pain, you know, when they do this, so, you know, like we don't have the bandwidth. Maybe you don't, you know, maybe we don't have the bandwidth to be kind or gracious or find beauty and love in them. And maybe we don't. Maybe a relationship has just gotten too bad where the levels of respect have just been violated so much, so you really don't have the bandwidth to extend another olive branch. Maybe you don't, and that's fine. Maybe you really don't have the, you know, the time to dedicate to like learning something new or whatever because you're just so distracted by outer things in the world, which would be Mercury. Maybe that story is true, right? But it's time to revisit those things when the planets go retrograde. When so many planets go retrograde, what it's doing, first they stationary, first they stop, they station, stationary retrograde, then before they turn forward again, they stationary direct. And, you know, those stationary periods can be weeks to a month as well. So it's going to be, you know, for a month or two, I mean, for at least about another month, there's going to be planets that are either moving really slow or stationary, not moving much at all. So the thing that happens is the energy tends to stop and get stuck. And what can happen is, the other thing I wanted to mention is that we can get stubborn and stuck. We're going to get a little bit stubborn and stuck on something. Energy gets really fixated and concentrated. Even with just one retrograde planet, that's what happens. The energy stops and gets very concentrated. When you get 4 of them that are either moving backwards or not moving at all, that's a lot of energy that can feel stuck, but it's also a lot of energy to concentrate. It is going to be very concentrated for the next month or so. It is. It's just, what are you concentrating your energy on? What are you concentrating on? Because if you're not, again, the reason why we need to live our life with love and joy and beauty and all those things the planets represent, you know, our full power and glory, which is the sun, full love and connection, which is the moon, full courage, which is Mars, full intelligence and curiosity and joy, which is Mercury, full inspiration, which is Jupiter, full beauty and harmony, which is Venus, and full commitment to truth, which is Saturn. Wherever we're not doing that, these stressful moments reveal it, and there's frustration. And these kind of fixations and obsessions. And when we're not using those energies well, moments like this, you'll see just things go poof, and it happens within us. And then we can project it outward, and you know, all these kind of things can go. Or when this much energy gets retrograde, we can just want to collapse and kind of avoid things and be like, oh, because it's hard for us, it's painful, because we don't really know how to move forward with it so easily when planets are retrograde. we tend to not be able to move forward so easily. But I will tell you this, if you're fixated and obsessed on the right things, you can move forward very quickly when planets are retrograde or stationary and all this as well. Like you can make remarkable progress in your relationships when Venus is retrograde, even though it might be because it's slowing down and it's becoming internal and you're facing it yourself. So again, that's just a catalyst for some kind of energy. A lot of relationships start and get fixed on Venus retrograde. Sometimes they back up in order, something gets interfered with, and then the person says, oh yeah, this wasn't right, and our process backs up. That's what the retrograde does, is our preconceptions and our biases and our default way of seeing it backs up and stops working. So again, with these 4 planets, the things that you're usually just kind of mechanically focused on every day, which is Saturn, is now backing up, and you're like, so again, it's very easy to say, well, this has just been hard, I haven't had time to do it. It's like, really? Have you actually not had time to focus on this other thing? Because you've been focusing on other things in the world, maybe this other thing that's more important to you has been neglected. It's time to evaluate those things and make sure it's true. Especially also with Jupiter retrograde. Have you made did you make a commitment to something last year, last summer, or some other time when Jupiter was moving forward? Let's say like with teachings and learning. Some of this is happening with my astrology students as well. It always happens where you make a commitment and it's inspiring, and then Jupiter starts turning retrograde, and then we're like, oh, it's hard, I got to go back and actually really learn this. So instead of doing that, I'm trying to find inspiration in other things, but I'm actually just kind of feeling frustration because this thing that inspires me is kind of making me work harder now. Again, the benefit of that is you go back and you actually learn it with much more passion, and you learn it more thoroughly. That's what the retrograde is. You redo it. You go back and you relearn it. Go back and get re-inspired. Find those things that inspire you and make sure that they're true. Maybe it's not, and you can evaluate that. If the things that you go back and say, no, it's not just that it's hard and I don't want to do the work, it's not inspiring me as much as I thought. I'm not as inspired. So maybe you committed to something that wasn't so inspiring and you've authentically left it. But look out for these frustrations around especially long-term things like your focus and commitment, which is Saturn, things that inspire you, which are Jupiter, and this kind of crankiness around saying, and the excuses that you might tell yourself, oh, I just don't have the time, or I just don't really like it as much as I thought. Is that true, or is it just because you went out, you were externalizing it for a while, and then once it started to demand your attention, you checked out, and now you don't want to put in the work anymore? Just ask yourself and make sure that what you're abandoning, what you're leaving, is what you actually want to leave. So, especially with all this energy stuck right now, it's a great time to get fixated and obsessed on what you really love, on what you really want to create, on what you really want to be committed to, and what you probably or maybe have kind of left in all of the busyness of the world. Because that's what all the external qualities of the planets are. It's where we're out living our life. They go retrograde and we go, oh, wait a minute, this thing, oh yeah. Am I inspired? Am I focused on what I should be focused on? Now you got 4 planets all kind of saying that, so it can feel like a lot, and frustrations and feeling stuck. So ask yourself these questions. That's why I'm making this video, to maybe kind of get your mind out of a fixated, stuck, obsessed, stubborn way of seeing things. Because again, we don't notice how stubborn we're being, and we're just kind of going through things. It's like, well, wait a minute. Bring some intelligence into that. Look at your life. Try to break down the individual compartments too. The Saturn, the Jupiter, they're different. Mercury, Venus, they're all different. It's not just one kind of emotion. Use discrimination and see these different parts of your life and see and try to untangle those threads. That's what makes for intelligence. That's what intelligence is. Rather than just emotions and, oh, I'm just pissed off about it all. You know, don't get anywhere with that kind of stuff. So a lot of opportunity for all these retrograde planets. We're going to be fixated on something. So make sure your life is that you're living the life that you want, that's enjoyable, passionate, dharmic, and purposeful, and focus on those things you love, because they'll never let you down. Even if you got to work harder at those things, if you love something and it's demanding of you, and it's demanding something of you, and you're not sure that you want to work on it, just ask yourself if you really love it. If you really love it, give it a little more time and a little more effort and energy, and the payoff is tenfold, because your heart is there, and then you're going to learn something amazing about something you really love. Okay, that's enough.